In 2020, when games are used by the military for a wide gamut of operations, training, analysis, and many other areas, it's difficult to remember if this wasn't always the case. But in 2006, when the Serious Games Showcase and Challenge debuted, the military did not use games for very many uses. In fact, many in senior leadership didn't even want to hear the word games.
In the early 2000s, I was a project officer in the Science and Technology Division, the Marine Corps Program Manager Training Systems Office. I was responsible for the research and development of game-based training simulations known as Tactical Decision-Making Simulations, or TDSs. At that time, game-based training, or serious games as they're often known now, weren't accepted by the Marine Corps. To keep people at our meetings from daring to utter that dirty word game, we had a swear jar on the table. Anybody who used the word game instead of simulation had to ante up.
Right around, so for the next maybe 5, 6, 7 years as this thing developed, particularly out of the UK, and I don't know if Andy Fox is still involved in this community, but he was the lead for the UK on a lot of this effort. He was a DOD, UK MOD civilian at the time in a fairly senior position. And he was up against it in that the public writ large in the UK did not want to see their soldiers playing video games. Right. And hence, they were totally against the idea of calling them games at all. They wanted some other name.
So that was the situation in 2006 when Ken Critton and Peter Smith decided to start the Serious Games Showcase and Challenge.
It all happened as kind of a confluence of events that just was perfect from a timing perspective. That during vIITSEC, each service rotates around and has a special event during their year as the lead service. The Navy had that in 2006. So leading up to that event, call went out for people to determine what would be a good special event for the vIITSEC venue. And I had been talking to a lot of experts in the field about serious games and realized that really the advocacy and awareness of the power of serious games was an area that was missing. It was also during this time frame that I had been spending time with the actual entertainment game industry, different events that they were holding, and wanted to mirror some of the success that they had for some of their independent games, and thought that instituting something like that at vIITSEC for the serious games genre would actually provide that extra boost of awareness and advocacy to the populace that attends vIITSEC that is interested in training. And so it just happened to all coincide at the same time. Fortunately, it was a little bit difficult to get the buy-off on that because not everybody was truly understanding of the power of serious games. But over the course of the year, we were able to bring them around, and as a result, it went off very well in the first year, and it's just continued to grow.
Although in 2006, when the Serious Games Showcase and Challenge began, games were not highly regarded within the military. In just a few short years, that began to change.
And so this, led to me eventually writing the paper, Games, Just How Serious Are They? Which for many, I felt was a bit of a turning point. And, that paper, in addition to a study that was done in CFB Gagetown, based on a troop warrant officer's course, that showed how much more effective the training could be using a video game than going out there and burning all that gas and ammunition. But again, because of this ABCA standardization agreement, I had access to all of the studies that were being done by the R&D communities that were never published in the open literature. So DSTO in Australia and the equivalent in the MOD, all of the DND stuff. And I collected all of these through that standardization agreement and summarized them all into one paper. And they all showed roughly the same thing. The video game-based rehearsal could give you about a 20% bump in performance at half the price.
I believe that they have become more open to the use of games in training. The reason that exists, one, again, they see all of the different ways that gaming technology can be used to impart a training objective, because we've been able to show them all those different means through the Serious Game Showcase and Challenge. But I also believe that it is shifted because the leaders themselves, the demographic of the leaders has shifted. At the time in 2006, there were probably fewer leaders that were actually had played games and understood the power of the games. Whereas today, a vast majority of our leaders have played games and they really do understand it, and they are more open to the use of new and varied virtual technologies in order to provide that learning experience. The virtual environment is much more prevalent, and in the games aspect of that, virtual environment is just one of the many tools that they have available for themselves. And so they are very much more interested in exploring those technologies and employing those technologies for their different purposes.
Canadian troops in Afghanistan face real threats every day. Taliban attacks, roadside bombs. Now the military has a virtual tool to help soldiers prepare for battle. Video games, essentially, once the territory of teens. These high-tech programs are a growing part of the Canadian Forces training strategy. James Cudmore shows us how it's done.
They can actually rehearse a mission in the simulation the night or the morning before they go out and actually do that mission for real. That's got to have big dividends.
In cost, in combat effectiveness, and ultimately, the military says, in lives. James Cudmore, CBC News, Canadian Forces Base, Kingston, Ontario.
Russ Phelps had developed 3 games which have won the Best Government Game at the Serious Game Showcase and Challenge. The first in 2008, the most recent last year in 2019. As such, he's uniquely qualified to discuss how military's use of games has changed during the time the challenge has been in effect.
Well, when we first built our game in 2008, the leadership was not familiar with games. 06s or Master Chiefs or senior enlisted and officers didn't really know games. You may have had junior enlisted and maybe junior officers that understood them. And so it was a real lift to try to convince them that there is a serious application for game-based technologies and game-based approaches. By 2014, when we submitted Strike Group Defender, now we had 04s, 05s that had been playing games for a long time. And then likewise, you had mid to senior enlisted folks that were doing it. By 2019, we have flag officers that have been playing games for 15 years or more. And then all the enlisted ranks we have found have been playing games. So you always have to make the case of why a game can solve a problem and where it fits in. But compared to 2008, we had to make the case that it was actually a legitimate thing and not just a novelty. So it really is this intersection of people growing up more and more with games, leadership in the defense becoming more familiar with them, and then lastly, the games have just been getting so much more sophisticated technologically that there's broader and more wide application for them to find a place. So it's not so hard to find a spot and defend that for a serious-based application. So when we submitted Strike Group Defender in 2014, it was just it was a game. It was the front end, it was the UI, it was the back end. It was an entire game, and it had a mini platform built within it. We built it on the Unity engine, and so on. And we had a really positive experience, and we achieved the goals we wanted to with Straight Group Defender. And as soon as we got done with it, our customer said, "That was fantastic. I want another one." And then another person in their office says, "I want one." And so what we realized is that we've been concentrating on building games, but really what we needed to do from an R&D standpoint is focus on building a platform that was unique and could reduce the barrier to entry for serious games within the government. And so that is how we conceived of the JCOR platform, the Joint Cognitive Operations Research Environment, which is essentially a platform meant for the specialized purpose of serious games in defense. When we started building or conceiving of JCOR in 2014, 2015, there was nothing that we needed that was out there as a turnkey. You had a game engine, but it didn't do good computation. You had a simulator, but it didn't do, front-end game development. You had games that did not have rich data collection architecture, or you had simulations that were systems focused but not human focused, and therefore unsuitable for a lot of purposes. And so the R&D goal with the Office of Naval Research and the Navy at that point was, well, let's build a platform that reduces the barrier to entry for people and conceives of games as apps. And we're really building the iOS or the iPhone, or we're building the Android, because people in this increasingly virtualization of content, most customers are not going to have the expertise, the budget, the wherewithal, the risk tolerance, the authorization to build a back-end architecture for game. But they do have a lot of content and experts that they just need to better present in a game-based application. And so that was where JCOR came from. And it was focused on rapid prototype. It still is to this day, rapid prototyping, wargaming, AI development, and experimentation. And training is a purpose that is widely used throughout it as well. And so from 2014 to 2019, we expanded from Strike Group Defender as the app to JCOR as the host and the developer of apps.
I really believe that the vast majority of the serious games were in the first-person shooter context. Again, the technology was not as advanced, and so to truly engage the user, they needed to have, it was more of a kinematic that were imparted within the games, and that was through the first-person shooter type of concept. So the Marine Corps and the Army were using a lot of those technologies to engage their soldiers and Marines into the use of games to accomplish whatever they were teaching. And but today, it's with the additional technologies that we have available, we can get into softer technologies, softer science aspects of it. It's not, doesn't have to be, the force on force type of thing. It can truly be something that's more cognitive and strategic in nature, and trying to get to different learning approaches and different aspects of how you come to decisions, policy making, and things along those lines. And so it has changed from that perspective, and it's becoming much more powerful as a result. It's the power of involvement. If you think back, and it's been stated multiple different ways in the teaching communities, but Benjamin Franklin, I think, summed it up best. when he said that. So Benjamin Franklin said, "If you tell me, I will forget. If you teach me, I may remember. But if you involve me, I will learn." And that's what the power of the game is. It's the involvement aspect where you are actually doing the task that is assigned. And through that repetition of doing the task within that virtual environment and achieving the goals that are set out within that game, you are learning and you are retaining. And so it's from an ability to not only get the learning value out of it, but it's the retention and the proficiency of that learning value that comes from being able to have hands-on within the serious game. Is the merger of the games within the LVC construct. So LVC is live training, and then you have virtual training, then you have constructive training, and then also in the Marine Corps and the Army, they're spending more time on games as a separate subset, and then merging them together gives us the ability to accomplish multiple different training objectives within the same basic training environment as we push forward and merge those together. And so you might be training an individual operator on a game, but that operator is part of an overall squad that is also providing inputs into a larger context of a exercise that is involving live players as well as other virtual assets and stimulated by some of the different constructed assets that are out there. And so I think that's one of the more powerful aspects of how we're using it today, is not just as standalone, but as linked with other different types of training apparatus.
So the types of applications that we're building with the J-Core and our multitude of different customers is pretty wide ranging. In one case, we're taking literally a Monopoly-like tactics board game and converting it into a distributable virtual world. We are doing an enormous amount of work on creating decision-making environments where operators or users are making decisions in virtual environments. And then we're using this real rich, immersive data to be the fuel to train algorithms, human-based algorithms. A lot of applications in the AI development world. We've done things like a lot of things: intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, integrated missile defense, starting to look at space systems, planes, ships, submarines, command and control, wargaming types of effort. We worked on wide-scale casualty, mass casualty in wartime scenarios. Interesting project we're working on with the Navy is mapping out the 30-year shipbuilding plan over time and seeing how that becomes a composite capability all the way out to 2048. So there's a broad swath of applications that we're working on. And while our team is certainly very dynamic in ability to do diverse things, I think it really speaks to the enormous breadth and depth and diversity of application that's coming out of the gaming market, gaming technologies, gaming know-how, and merging that in with real know-how from the serious side or the defense side. And so those are some snapshots of some of the projects that we're working on without getting into great detail.
goals really were advocacy and awareness of the power of serious games.
So we believe that gaming technology has very broad application. If you think about a game, it's really just the game is a wrapper around a bundle of sophisticated technologies. And the wrapper can be entertainment and fun, or it can be a serious game and meant that it's some type of altruistic or civic or some type of education or learning, anything other than entertainment purpose, although it should still be fun. And so these technologies are really powerful in solving a lot of issues that I think that the DoD in particular struggles with. For instance, if you take Call of Duty, I can't see really anything more sophisticated as a battle management system. You have distributed people over time, geographically separated, working in real time with a common set of rules against common enemies with real-time outcome. And they're running a war. And so if you look at those capacities and you kind of analogically overlay them onto what's going on, I can see that games have, and basically the components of games can solve large or relatively narrow parts of this. This is kind of a two-way street too, because serious games in the beginning were fun and they're cool, but the more serious they become, the less interesting and less fun they also become. So if I use a set of technology to solve a data distribution problem, that isn't necessarily fun. That isn't necessarily a game. And so I think what we're finding is there's this kind of inverse force that is happening where the more serious I became in trying to use these gaming technology to solve real world problems, the less interesting and compelling and gamey they become. And so that's a thing we're trying to contend with as well. And I think it's a good thing, and it's part of technologies that are being fostered out of the gaming world, starting to solve broad or very deep and specific or enduring problems in the acquisition level, as opposed to just having a game itself, which is delivering content and trying to improve on something. And the other thing is I think that games are really finding their place in a unique market space within the Department of Defense. Typically you have BogSat, a bunch of guys sitting around a table doing a wargaming on a laminated map with Legos and stickies and PowerPoint briefs. And on the other end, you have a very high-end sophisticated modeling and simulation that's largely focusing on systems simulations. But in the middle, there's this huge space where you need simulation capabilities that you can build fast, quickly, inexpensively, and get an 80% solution like now or within hours, as opposed to the big sophisticated simulations, which are very important, coming up with an expensive answer after months. And so we're finding that games are right in that intersection between completely manual or analog wargaming or efforts, and then on the right side of that is sophisticated modeling and simulation. And so this what we call medium fidelity, highly iterative, human-focused answer in real time or near real time is a huge market right now that people are dying to get into. To quote Vice Admiral Manazar, who sponsored JCOR right in the beginning, we talked about, we're the 80% solution. We're not going to guarantee that this is the perfect answer. And up until that point, if you said that, that was almost heresy. Nobody really contemplated that data that was less than 100% accurate would have any value to it. And he said, I will take 80% all day long because my staffs are just making it up already. So if I can have a simulation, I can run a game-based simulation and get answers fast and now, I'll check some of them in the future with the sophisticated answers and make sure. And so I think if you use that as an overlay, I think you'll find that games and the technologies that support this wrapper around serious games is having broad applications, and I think people are finding really solid homes for it. where there's an absence of a lot of solutions right now. And so with J-Core and what we're doing, that is where we're concentrating, is in the rapid solution, rapid answers, easy and quick to prototype, low barrier to entry, economical development of things, and focusing on the technical readiness level that's really between the 2 and the 5, and creating in that space. Of the dozens of applications we build on J-Core, almost every one of them falls within that middle medium fidelity area. And so I think that is a real focus area and home that I believe games are going to increasingly fill. So where do we see serious games going, and what are some of the harder points that I think we face as games make it to the next generation? I would say the recurring difficulty that we see is the mismatch in expectations of what games can do. We have people, for instance, that go, I want Call of Duty. Well, they have $1 million problem and they're trying to solve it with $1 billion franchise. So I think that mismatching what can be done and what should be done and what can be done well can be a real problem. I think also there are a lot of people that are getting into the space of serious games. A lot of them are coming from the gaming industry, or conversely, they're defense groups that are trying to push into games. Compliance and security is becoming an enormously complicated, expensive, and serious topic. Commercial game companies that want to get in defense usually don't last past the first conversation when you show them what they have to do on the new security compliance in networks and physical security. And so as games are becoming more serious and they are addressing very serious applications and real world data, they are losing the public face and going behind, the proverbial green door more and more. And so the minute that games go behind the door and they are not out in the commercial side interacting amongst the game world and other things, I feel like there's an atrophy in relevance or in currency on that as they become another simulation as opposed to the DNA of a good game. So these are good problems to have because it means that there's growth and there's acceptance. But as we, in the game spaces, we move from a niche to a reputable capability, we have to address the serious problems that reputable systems and other efforts have to also undergo. And so if we want to play in the serious space, we have to do the serious application and infrastructure that goes with it. And that is very expensive and very difficult, and it's going to be quite off-putting to a lot of people that want to just get into games and defense or games and government because of a multitude of really good reasons why they should. So I think the reality and the notion is getting very difficult in some regards as it becomes more and more serious and addresses increasingly real world problems.
From a technology perspective, artificial intelligence is going to be something that is going to be at the forefront of everybody's mind. It is going to be in existence in varying degrees, and then how we tap those pieces of artificial intelligence and then bring them into the gaming world and then marry that up with what we want to accomplish, using artificial intelligence and gaming to meet the different training objectives that we have. So decision making is one of the most important things that we need to train in our different warfighters. And as artificial intelligence comes to bear, decisions have to be made much more rapidly than they do today. And we need to have an ability to actually practice that and train for that, because it is going to be a different way of conducting business.
Dr. Melissa Sheldrum is a serious games researcher. She discusses some of the work that she has done in the area of artificial intelligence and serious games.
How these games have been currently used to create artificial intelligence agents and machine learning is a lot to do with how it generates the human gameplay data. So right now, we have all of these really advanced systems, and maybe we want to model a human, but we haven't been able to actually record their data in any way. We don't have data sets to create these AI machine learning algorithms or models or agents from a data set. So when you have a video game, it's very rich data set. There's a lot of engagement from the human operator or player. So the main way they've been used is to generate the data that can then be used to train up the models or the AI. In the past, we have used games to generate the gameplay data in order to train a human-esque AI or AI teammate within the game. One study that we've been looking at is how should we train up, or what characteristics should an agent have if it is a teammate to a human player, or if it is just part of the gameplay itself, or if it's an adversary. How does the mechanisms of training up AI vary how it then performs in the game is something that I'm really interested in. We've also used rudimentary AI as agents for basically tactics control. And then also you can use it to explore tactics. So when you get 1,000 people playing a game 100 times, you have a really high amount of data in order to do those data analytic techniques and find what might be actually the optimal tactic or strategy or game plan that comes from the data, which may be different from one that comes down from an expert saying, here's what I would do. There may be one that's actually even better. Yeah, so we worked on a study where we brought a lot of people in, and they played SGD or JCore, throughout the day. We then took each individual player's gameplay data and used AI machine learning techniques to train up an agent that performed like them. Then we aggregated everybody's data together and trained one sort of on the player as a whole, or players as a whole, and then a few other tweaks. So we did ones that are the exact opposite of what the player would do. And the idea is that if we're going to have AI teammates or AI like the wingman of the future, they need to act just like a real teammate would. So what does that look like? Does it look just like the human player? Does it do the same things the human would do? Well, then that just is sort of redundant, right? That's just doubling up your person and not having a full team. Does it fill in where the individual player's skills are lacking? Well, that seems like a good idea, but then that player might not understand what the AI is doing, and therefore they won't trust it. And then they'll try to take over for that role. And then again, we're at the same place where we just have a human doing everything. Should it be trained like or performed like an expert? Again, then the human might not understand it. They might not trust it. They might not like it. But also, if the expert plays in the same way or different style than the human player, then you might get some conflict there. So what we were trying to do is look at elements of any one individual player's gameplay style, or how they achieve individual goals within a game, and then comparing that to what we know about human teams, and trying to figure out what is the best way to train up an AI agent to be a teammate rather than just an assistant. I guess what I would want people to know about how games are being used in the field of artificial intelligence would be not necessarily what I want them to know, but how I want them to think about what we talk about as games and video games and board games. That yes, they are entertainment purposes, but they are also just simulated environments. Even if you're playing chess, it's still a simulated environment. It's a way that we can control specific variables and look at human behavior within those parameters. We can then test it over different parameters over time. And so really it's not just a video game, it's a data collection test bed, right? So lots of times it's really difficult to get people to understand the difference between a video game or a game and a high fidelity modeling simulation computer, doing Monte Carlos and the gonculators. But also we want to make sure that they understand how they are similar and how they can be used for similar use cases. One is very straightforward, mathematical, no human error involved. And the other one is looking at how does a human interact with the system and how does that human factor affect the data and the output at the other end. And so one of my favorite phrases is like, humans are weird, right? You can create a system and run it through an M&S and it works fine. Put it in front of an human operator, and they don't like the color of the button, right? So those things we wouldn't know unless we actually look at the human factor. And video game technology is a great way to get operators involved early and often, and to generate a lot of gameplay data to make sure that they're understanding, that they're learning, that they're exploring, and that they are anticipating use of the system just like the engineers thought they would.
In the 15 years of the Serious Games Showcase and Challenge, we've seen a huge change in the military's attitudes towards and use of games. Games have moved from being taboo, from bringing scorn from most just by mentioning the word game, to a position of near ubiquity. They are used not only for training, but analysis, operations, and many other fields. They are in the forefront of many areas of the military and are poised to see their usage grow even further in the future.